How might your life have been different if there was a religion for you? A religion that honored you as a woman, as made equal in the image of God. Welcome to Heretica, her eco-feminist theology podcast. My name is Elena and I am an eco-feminist theologian. Please subscribe at theologyofher.substack.com. Hi everyone and welcome. In this podcast episode, we'll start exploring Mary Magdalene within and without the Gospels. In this first podcast, I'll be sharing about Mary in the Gospel according to Mark, which is one of the 4 New Testament Gospels. In her book, called In Memory of Her, by feminist theologian Elizabeth Schussler Fiorenza, she begins by stating, in the Passion account of Mark's Gospel, 3 disciples figure prominently. On the one hand, 2 of the 12, Judas who betrays Jesus and Peter who denies him, and on the other, the unnamed woman who anoints Jesus. But while the stories of Judas and Peter are engraved in the memory of Christians, the story of the woman is virtually forgotten. Although Jesus pronounces in Mark 14:9, "And truly I say to you, wherever the gospel is preached in the whole world, what she has done will be told in memory of her." The woman's prophetic sign action, which is the anointment, did not become a part of the gospel knowledge of Christians. Even her name is lost to us. Wherever the gospel is proclaimed and the Eucharist celebrated, another story is told. The story of the apostle who betrayed Jesus. The name of the betrayer is remembered, but the name of the faithful disciple is forgotten because she was a woman. Although the story of the anointing is told in all 4 Gospels, it is obvious that the redactional retelling of the story seeks to make the story more palatable to a patriarchal Greco-Roman audience. Whereas the 4th Gospel, which is the Gospel of John, identifies the woman as Mary of Bethany, who in feminist theology is considered to be Mary Magdalene. They are one and the same person, and who was, as a faithful friend of Jesus, shows her love by anointing him. Luke shifts the focus of the story from woman as disciple to woman as sinner. Despite their differences, all 4 Gospels reflect the same basic story. A woman anoints Jesus. This incident causes objections, which Jesus rejects by approving of the woman's action. If the original story had been just a story about the anointing of a guest's feet, it is unlikely that such a commonplace gesture would have been remembered and retold as the proclamation of the gospel. Therefore, it is much more likely that in the original story, the woman anointed Jesus' head, since the prophet in the Old Testament anointed the head of the Jewish king. The anointing of Jesus must have been understood immediately as the prophetic recognition of Jesus, the anointed, the Messiah, the Christ. According to the tradition, it was a woman who named Jesus by and through her prophetic sign action. It was a politically dangerous story. So from that I understand that it's being stated here that Mary Magdalene actually anointed his head and not his feet. The story of anointing his feet was later stated to be able to deem her as the sinful woman. By anointing his head, this places Mary Magdalene not only as equal to Jesus, but even born equal to Jesus from a young age. That is, she had higher experiences. And this is evident by the fact that she instigates Jesus as the Messiah through her sign action of anointing him. For me, this raises the question if this makes Mary Magdalene a prophet herself. I think she was given the gift of being a prophet, and if Jesus needed to be anointed by a woman, what does that say about woman's role during his ministry, and how he understood women's role in terms of elevating humanity and in relation to God. Also, if it is only through a woman that one can attain the highest. I tend to say yes to this last question, as all evidence is pointing in this direction. But back to the historical facts. In Mark's Gospel, the story is sandwiched between the statement that the leaders of Jesus' people wanted to arrest him and the announcement of Jesus' betrayal by Judas for money. Mark thus depoliticizes the story of Jesus' passion, first by shifting the blame for his death from the Romans to the Jewish establishment, and second, by theologically defining Jesus' messianship as one of suffering and death. Whereas according to Mark, the leading male disciples do not understand this suffering messianship of Jesus. They reject it and finally abandon him. The women disciples who have followed Jesus from Galilee to Jerusalem suddenly emerge as the true disciples in the Passion narrative. They are Jesus' true followers, who have understood that his ministry was not rule and kingly glory, but diakonia, that is service. Thus the women emerge as the true Christian ministers and witnesses. The unnamed woman who names Jesus with a prophetic sign action in Mark's Gospel is the paradigm for the true disciple, which is Mary Magdalene. While Peter had confessed without truly understanding it, saying, "You are the anointed one," the woman anointing Jesus recognizes clearly that Jesus' messianship means suffering and death. Both Christian feminist theology and biblical interpretation are in the process of rediscovering that the Christian gospel cannot be proclaimed if the women disciples and what they have done are not remembered. So let's explore Mary Magdalene in more detail in the Gospel of Mark. After the evangelist describes the death of Jesus on the cross, looking on from a distance are two groups of women. In one of these groups of women is Mary Magdalene, who have known Jesus since he was in Galilee. The fact that they have known him since Galilee lets us know that the following originated in Galilee, the place where Jesus' mission began, and that they continue to follow him, indicating Mary Magdalene and the other women are among his disciples. Mary Magdalene, therefore, is one of the women who witnesses Jesus' crucifixion. The Gospel states, "And there were also women beholding from afar, among whom were both Mary Magdalene and Mary, the mother of James the Less and of Joseph, and Salome, who when he was in Galilee followed him and ministered unto him, and many other women that came up with him unto Jerusalem." Feminist theologian Elizabeth Schussler Fiorenza, as a result, coined the expression the discipleship of equals. This means that there was no distinction between male and female disciples at the beginning of the Jesus movement. All were regarded as disciples of the same master. They saw themselves as brothers and sisters. Schussler Fiorenza claims Mark's androcentric language takes on an inclusive dimension by introducing female disciples. According to this pattern, three people are part of a small group, which in turn is part of a larger group. In this way, Mary Magdalene, Mary, the mother of James the Younger and of Joseph, and Salome are part of an inner circle of women who used to follow and serve Jesus. They in turn are part of a larger group of women who accompanied Jesus on his journey to Jerusalem. In a similar way, Peter, James, and John belong to the 12, or the disciples who are with Jesus all the time. But they also belong to the larger group who follow him, the crowd. They all follow Jesus, but their commitment becomes deeper as their number decreases. In this way, Mary Magdalene, Mary the mother of James the Younger and of Joseph, and Salome are on the same level as Peter, James, and John. The three women are among the closest and most committed disciples of Jesus. Mary Magdalene and the other named women are described as doing what disciples of Jesus do. even though they are not explicitly called disciples. Theologically, however, it is more important to follow Jesus and to serve him and to be called a disciple. Mary Magdalene and the other women are thus seen as very important people for Mark. What's also very important about these female disciples, in contrast to the male disciples who had fled, as Mark describes earlier on in his Gospel, and thus proved to be cowards, is that they dare to do what the male disciples were afraid of doing, namely to stay with Jesus in his darkest moment. The women appear when the male disciples disappear from the story, namely under the cross. Now Mary Magdalene witnesses the burial and the empty tomb. In Mark 15, verse 47, the women, including Mary Magdalene, discover the tomb of Jesus. And Mary Magdalene and Mary, the mother of Joseph, beheld where he was laid. Reading the verse. And when the Sabbath was past, Mary Magdalene and Mary, the mother of James and Salome, bought spices, that they might come and anoint him. And very early on the first day of the week, they come to the tomb when the sun was risen. And they were saying among themselves, Who shall roll us away the stone from the door of the tomb? And looking up, they see that the stone is rolled back, for it was exceeding great. And entering into the tomb, they saw a young man sitting on the right side, arrayed in a white robe, and they were amazed. And he said unto them, Be not amazed. You seek Jesus the Nazarene, who has been crucified. He is risen. He is not here. Behold the place where they laid him. But go tell his disciples and Peter, He goeth before you into Galilee. There shall you see him. And they went out and fled from the tomb, for trembling and astonishment had come upon them. And they said nothing to anyone, for they were afraid. Now when he was risen early on the first day of the week, he appeared first to Mary Magdalene, from whom he had cast out 7 demons. She went and told them that had been with him, and they mourned and wept. And they, when they heard that he was alive, and had been seen of her, disbelieved. Thus Mary Magdalene observes the death, the burial, and the empty tomb. She also is the first disciple to see the risen Christ. Moreover, in the lists of women who are witnesses to the death, burial, and empty tomb, Mark always mentions Mary Magdalene first. This shows that the first place in a list is the most important place, reserved for the most important person. Mary Magdalene thus becomes the first follower in Mark's Gospel who observes and witnesses the core of the Christian faith. With her own eyes, she witnesses Jesus' crucifixion and death. The voice in the white robe that told the women what to do was actually an angel. So Mary Magdalene and the other women have the ability to see and listen to angels, known as angelophany, which is actually God revealing information or meaning, and it is always done through an angel. Being able to see and hear this is important, as it is in all 4 Gospels. We will see that it is women who have this experience, yet different in each. So drawing a conclusion, as we have seen in the Gospel of Mark, Mary Magdalene, together with some women mentioned by name, used to follow and serve Jesus in Galilee and all the way to Jerusalem. The way Mark describes this following and serving comes very close to what he means by discipleship. Although he never calls Mary Magdalene or any other woman a disciple, it is certain that he grants her a major role among the close followers of Jesus at the decisive moments of the death and resurrection. At the end of Mark's Gospel, Mary Magdalene becomes the main figure. She, accompanied by other women, is present at Jesus' crucifixion, his burial, and the discovery of the empty tomb. As Mary Magdalene is always mentioned first among the women, She is depicted as the first and most important witness of the decisive moments at the end of Jesus' life: his death, his burial, and his disappearance from the tomb. Mark waits to make explicit mention of her and the other women at the moment when the men have all fled. This is a narrative device to emphasize their presence and the male disciples' absence at the constitutive events of the Christian faith. This is further underlined by the fact that the angel in the empty tomb sends Mary Magdalene and the other women back to the male disciples at the climax of the narrative. Narratologically, Mary Magdalene, and to some degree the other women, function as models with whom the readers are invited to identify. Thank you for listening, and I hope you will join me in the next episode where I explore Mary Magdalene in the Gospel of Matthew. How might your life have been different if there was a religion for you? A religion that affirmed you as a woman, as equal to man, and made in the image of God. How might your life have been different? Heretica, her eco-feminist theology educational podcast.